Welcome to the Numerical Tarot, a new tarot paradigm, an alternative to tradition, an axial system of archetypal crystallography, a trans-culturally anthropomorphized life-biased binary influence calculator, a wisdom system and archetype enhancer with harmony of interpretation throughout. The content of all the videos in this series are excerpts, edits and brief summaries from the eBooks All Things Are Numbers and All Things Are Patterns, links below. For a more complete explanation of each idea, additional reading might be helpful. Hopefully the basic ideas come across enough to pique your interest in trying this alternative approach to tarot. Thanks to the previous videos in this series, we have established the existence of a number line in more than one way. So now, we can move on to examine how a number line conveys additional concepts that will eventually influence the archetypal nature of our tarot symbols and icons. So far, both of our models have created a generic thing that includes a central point. A point is an idea with no dimension or form, born from nothingness. The idea of coagulation or accretion creates this elusive point at the undefinable center of our model. What we have yet to mention is how a point, once established, uses the potential energy of these natural forces to create its own tangible form. The number line we are creating, with these various models, will be a helpful guide to understanding how evolving forms progress from this foundation of a single point. The apart together model was more complex than 4 circles and a point, but still pretty basic and simple. Now let's look at another pattern that introduces a bit more complexity, while still remaining true to the expression of 4 circles and a point. It's called the dimensional progression, and, as the name implies, it is more of a progression of ideas than a static model of stages. As a progression of ideas, this model uses the numbers that were attached to our 4 circles and point to suggest stages of development that are experienced as we pass through a model of 4 circles and a point in 9 steps. It goes like this: 1. No dimension. 2. One direction. 3. One dimension. 4. Any direction. 5. 2 dimensions. 6. Any direction. 7. 3 dimensions. 8. Every direction. 9. All dimensions. We have used 2 methods to create a point. But as a proposition of logic, we find that being just a point is not really enough. As a stationary and symmetrical point, a form of symmetry must be broken in order for anything to really exist. In other words, if the resulting point does not respond to its potential by breaking its implicit symmetry, it never really materializes. Instead, it just fades back into the surrounding symmetry it came from and we all go home. So in that sense, we could say that indeed a point is pointless as just a point. A point is only a point when it is recognized as a beginning to a progression of further development. To begin this requisite development, our point will employ the potent forces of time and motion to fulfill its obligation and break its symmetry. As we continue, we notice that once a point has chosen to move, it can of course only choose one direction, one axis, or one destination at a time, thus limiting each point to the number of universes it can create, 1. As the point moves out from its position of symmetry, it creates a universe of only one dimension. When it stops moving, it completes a one-dimensional form within that universe. This resulting form can then continue to develop, in any other direction it may choose, to create yet another form of 2 dimensions. Next, this 2-dimensional form can then continue this wave of development in any other direction to create the next form, of 3 dimensions. However, once all 3 physical dimensions of our universe are realized, only one step remains to complete the progression. The compiled dimensions must then radiate in all directions, creating and enclosing every form possible, and creating a universe of unlimited magnitude. When the sequence of development is completed, the all-dimensional radiating universe that results becomes a logically deduced equivalent to the spherical environment of our original model's ruling lines of force. Thus, by coming around full circle to contain the original point within a sphere, we duplicate the appearance of our original model, and successfully connect macrocosm to microcosm. Although not readily apparent, this progression from point to sphere can actually be described with the 9 steps of our number line. One way to see this progression as equivalent to our number line is to label each step with a geometric shape. A point, of course, is a point. When it is moving, it is called a ray. When it stops, it is a line or line segment. If every point along the line segment moves in a perpendicular direction, the same amount as the ray, it will simultaneously create a square and a plane. If every point on the plane moves the same amount again, it will simultaneously create a box and a cube. After the cube of this progression is formed, we find that we have now completely enclosed and defined the original center. When the center becomes enclosed by the finite nature of the cube, it causes an explosion of energy. In zero gravity, this explosion is uniform in direction and creates the final two shapes of a ball and a sphere. Another look at this geometric progression will show how it can be segmented into 9 alternating steps of balance and flux. Let's look again at those 9 steps. 1. No dimensions, balance. 2. One direction, flux. 3. One dimension, balance. 4. Any direction, flux. 5. 2 dimensions, balance. 6. Any direction, flux. 7. 3 dimensions, balance. 8. All directions, flux. 9. Every dimension, balance. Or 1. A point. 2. A ray. 3. A line. 4. A square. 5. A plane. 6. A box. 7. A cube. 8. A ball. 9. A sphere. What we have just witnessed is how the dimensional and geometric models moves us from no form or dimension at all, 1, to every physical dimension possible, 9, in 9 steps. As pointed out, the mechanism that drives this process is the impetus of the number 2, that breaks the inertia of non-manifestation. It is the number 2's ability to cause the nothingness around it to move toward the coagulated center, combined with the number 8's ability to explode the resulting manifestation back to nothingness, that is the propelling force of the entire model. The 2 and 8 are like the intake and exhaust valves of a cosmic engine, feeding the combustion chamber of the model's core, 4, 5, 6, through the one-way valves of the 3 and 7. The fuel consumed is the eternal sameness of dormant nothingness, not yet put into motion. However, unlike a real engine and actual fuel, this supply of energy is not so much used up, like engine fuel, but only made to change form as it passes through the confines of our model, eventually returning as it came, to nothingness, to be used again. The number line represents steps toward manifestation. The dimensional model shows us how the 3 dimensions of reality do not begin until the 3-7 stage of development. The 3 dimensions of reality that exist between the numbers 3 and 7 represent the measurable conclusions we can make about the temporal or corporeal mass and the type of reality associated with it. The progression from 1 dimension, 3, to 3 dimensions, 7, represents the building up of that mass into a form worthy of the label, reality. The emergence of reality from nothingness reinforces the idea of the 3-7 sphere as a spiritual as well as physical number. From these observations, we can see how our definition of reality depends on which side of the 3-7 skin we are making our perceptions, and how vague or defined that skin is. The dimensional model describes both the 4 and 6 as moving in any direction. This association is attributed to the seemingly optional, much more mechanical force used in building up the mass, as opposed to the compulsive, automatic, immediate and direct energy of the imploding and exploding 2 and 8. Actually, the steps from 4 to 6 are just as mandatory and compulsory as the 2 and 8 by virtue of the incompleteness of the whole cycle of creation. But because of the mixture of elements that occur within the spiraling mass, we see how the building of the mass becomes a process where applied effort reflects the mechanical nature of component parts as they work together in an atmosphere of reciprocity, gradually building toward a kind of critical mass. Together, the steps of the dimensional and geometric models create a cycle of endless augmentation that periodically culminates, at a critical mass, with an explosion and dissemination of acquired content. This cycle can complete its desired augmentation in one pass, or repeat endlessly, depending on the entity or event in question. Some of the examples of progressive models that are yet to come in this series of videos are mostly of a single pass, although repeated applications of each can create continued results if desired. The geometric progression we just described is a visual model that accompanies the dimensional model just described. These two models together are so similar in design as to be a perfect marriage of ideas. Geometry, being one of the most definitive forms of universal expression possible, makes the dimensional geometric combination a good language and visual model to build upon. Let's review its progress. At the beginning of the geometric progression is the point. The point is that infinitesimally undefinable area of the model with no form, which, when set into motion by the compulsive action of the number 2, marks the beginning of shapes to come. The process of changing from no dimension to the first dimension happens by breaking the inertia and symmetry of the number 1. This is the responsibility of the number 2. The number 2 marks the first occurrence of motion and time within the model and its steps of compulsive mandatory implosion toward a point of coagulation or accretion. As this occurs, we observe how the model consumes this theoretical atmosphere of time and motion as its fuel. Like a fish passing water over its gills, it draws in these companion elements. The explosive end result of this is the space displaced and the energy produced, as the intake and exhaust of the time-space continuum drives our model. As soon as the first 3 numbers have illuminated the first dimension of reality, at the number 3, the process of building to the last dimension, at the number 7, begins. Thus we see how the 3 dimensions are compiled, just like building a house, such that when the final dimension is solidified, the model's internal mass is formed. At this point we could say that the model is in fact finished. But whereas the work of building the model may be finished, the essence of the model is not considered complete until it relates back to the environment that created it. Outward expression of the model occurs as the solidified cube of this geometric progression yields to the power of critical mass, the result being an explosion of energy, back to the nothingness from which it came, 7, 8, 9, creating the final all-dimensional ball and sphere, and ending the whole progression. When we apply this information to existing tarot decks, the endless ascent of the number line becomes the path of the fool's spiritual journey. He starts as a naive point of ignorance, 1, and ends up with the culminating experience of the hermit's sphere of knowledge, 9. The explosive nature of the 8 is then analogous to his enlightenment, nirvana. In these 1 through 9 progressions, we have shown an alternate method for creating our model. We have also recreated the 9 steps of numerology. Also, by containing the original point within the resultant sphere, we see how elements of recursion are also evident within this seemingly linear progression. And, because the broken symmetry of the point creates an equally symmetrical sphere, we see how that sphere must immediately repeat the action of the original point or the whole model will cease to exist. Because of this, we come to view the resulting sphere as nothing more than another point, beginning a further and endless progression of development at a new relative scale of existence. In other words, point and sphere are like chicken and egg. The idea here is that 4 circles in a point describe basic stages of a manifest entity as it emerges from nothingness and returns. What we have not mentioned thus far is how the basic stages of our model, those lines of demarcation, are the result of an interference pattern that results from waves of energy traversing in opposite directions and colliding at a set number of points along the way. That's the how of how there are only 4 circles. The result, when combined with the point in the middle, is a pattern of stages, which, when labeled with numbers along a line, become 9 numbers of numerology. As 9 stages of development are shown to be a universally inspired number, we can now move forward to observe how more complex acts of manifestation can be seen to be governed by steps of 9. Again, this progression of ideas is just a simple diagram of geometric shapes leading one into the other. There is no cultural bias. We are not yet using these stages to describe anything human. We are simply, very simply, observing how possible it is to move from a fundamental point to an all-encompassing sphere in 9 steps. That's all. However, as we desire to apply this pattern to something human, there are all kinds of things we could observe about how this model influences the essence of each number along a line. But what about tarot icons? Are there any here? 9. All dimensions. Again, the hermit is easy to find in the concept of all dimensions. All dimensions implies a culminating of everything at the number 9, not 10. The hermit represents a person of vast experience and knowledge, a consummate being, who knows all. Equidistant from him on this number line is the magician. By viewing the magician and hermit as equidistant partners, we see how the magician is in fact the hermit at a young age. The magician is clever, the hermit is wise. Together they both represent activities of the mind. As opposite ends of a number line, they represent a process of education from cleverdom to wisdom, a concept that really shows up well when we view the major icons as two sets of 1 through 9 instead of an unbroken path of 22, as so many other studies of tarot prefer. 2. One direction. Perhaps a bit more obscure an association would be the idea of vision coming from the concept of a ray in one direction. But unobstructed direction is important to the concept of vision. Much as we might like to. We don't see around corners, we see in straight lines. After establishing vision as a characteristic of a 2, it is not hard to see how the concept of mystery, obscured or occulted vision, lands in the lap of the High Priestess. Some might say the High Priestess actually can see around corners, clairvoyant, thus conjuring up the idea of special vision. Also, the idea of motion is evident in this number, helping to explain the Rider-Waite-Smith 2 of coins. Additionally, in decks like Rider-Waite-Smith, we see blindfolds on the card of Justice, and 8, as well as the 8 and 2 of swords. One of a few places where this system agrees with tradition. 3. One dimension. A point is a pretty intangible concept. A ray is also not exactly a thing. The first actual thing, or form, to emerge in this progression of ideas is the line, which also becomes the first dimension of creation. By associating this number with the idea of form in creation, we again make easy associations to the beautiful and perfect form of the Empress. We also help explain the concept of creativity found in the Rider-Waite-Smith 3 of coins. Another place where this system agrees with tradition. 8. All directions. A ball is the inflated sphere, before it is filled with its culminating essence. By associating an inflated state with the number 8, we help explain the enthusiasm of the Rider-Waite-Smith 8 of coins. This inflated state may also be seen as enthusiasm, rather than strength, when associated with the card of strength in the major icons. To me, strength implies either muscle power or strength of courage, both concepts better associated with the Emperor. To me, the card of strength represents enthusiasm, adrenaline and explosive energy. Moving from a cube to a ball requires that all the points on the inside of the cube catch up to all the points on the outside of the cube, so that they can all become the surface of the ball together. This is an explosive process. This represents energy, not strength. Suggesting that archetypal influences may come from such simple, abstract conceptual patterns, might be hard for some to swallow. Traditional sources are very popular, and embedded into the history of tarot. But that is exactly the point being made here. That traditional sources that are inexorably linked to the history of various cultures, impose an unnecessary bias, and that by using these abstract conceptual patterns, we have shown how we in fact did not need any of those cultural sources to see the makings of a good tarot icon in these simple patterns. These archetypal associations are all right there. In the patterns of nature that are owned and invented by no one. If these highly abstract patterns of nature are indeed universal, then we gain another advantage over the cross-cultural approach that uses history to explain the intended meaning of cards, and instead anchor our intended meanings on universal, transcultural ideas that exist independent of any history or culture, whether here or in another galaxy far, far away. All things are patterns. All things are numbers. When contemplating the nature of reality, many point out the fact that all we can ever hope to know of anything is ultimately translated into electrical impulses, distributed throughout the brain in different ways. This being true, the importance of studying abstract patterns should become glaringly obvious. All things are patterns. Everything we know of the world can be, should be, and is reduced to thought patterns in the brain. A geometry teacher I had in high school once quoted someone who described the patterns of geometry as being infinitely drawn nowhere. These are the primordial patterns that this study of tarot looks for to describe the archetypes of humanity, whether seen within a tarot deck or not. Making the etymological traverse from abstract conceptual patterns to anthropomorphized icons can be tricky. But with a full and complete knowledge of the various models put forth in this study, I believe a more full and complete understanding of tarot icons can be found. That's all for this video. Thanks for watching. Hope it made sense. Links to eBooks, decks and merchandise below. And if anyone is interested in drawing a deck based on this system of organization, don't hesitate to contact me for a collaboration.